Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, today has been interesting, I guess, to say the least. We have found many things. In fact, 3 of our 4 witnesses here today alleged numerous crimes committed by the president. And at times it seemed like we were even trying to make up crimes as we go out. Well, if it wasn't this, it was the intent to do it. It went along that is interesting today as I started this day, and I'm going to come back to it now. As much as I respect these who came before us today, this is way too early. Because we've not, as a committee, done our job. We've not, as a committee, come together, looked at evidence, taken fact witnesses, put people here in front of us under oath to say what happened and how did it happen and why did it happen. We're taking the work of the Intel Committee and the other committees. We're taking it seemingly at face value, and I will remind all that the chairman even is the biggest proponent of this not happening in his earlier statements almost 20 years ago when he said we should not take a report from another entity and just accept it, otherwise we are a rubber stamp. Now, to my Democratic majority, they may not care, because as I've said before, this is about a clock and a calendar. A clock and a calendar. They're so obsessed with the election next year that they just gloss over things. In fact, what is interesting is, as I said earlier, 3 of the 4 witnesses alleged numerous crimes committed by the president. However, during the Intel Committee hearings, none of the fact witnesses identified a crime. If you're writing about this, that should alarm you. So this impeachment narrative being spun by the majority is a fake one. It's majority spinning 3% of the facts while ignoring 7% of the other. In fact, Professor Turley earlier said today, impeachment needs proof, not presumptions. We have one of the fact witnesses in the Intel Committee. I presumed that was what was going on, Mr. Sonderland. You know what is happening here today is also we found out today, I thought it was really interesting. This is the Judiciary Committee, but we also found out something today that facts don't matter. In fact, facts don't matter unless we can fit those facts to fit the narrative we want to spin before this committee and the American people. If they don't matter, we also heard one of the witnesses state today that it doesn't matter if aid was released or not. Of course it matters. But unfortunately, the only one of the many facts ignored by the majority. They're ignoring a ton of substantive facts that matter. It apparently doesn't matter to the Democrats that Ambassador Volker, the former special envoy to the Ukraine, made clear in his testimony there was no conditionality on the White House meeting or the aid. The Democrats and their witnesses haven't mentioned that because it's unhelpful to the narrative they're spinning. It apparently doesn't matter that to the Democrats and the majority here, that the president did not condition his aid on an investigation. In fact, Mr. Sondland's statement is to the contrary, was presumption. It was right here in this room. He called it a guess, right where you're sitting. Called it a guess, a presumption. That's what he thought. God forbid if we walk into our courtrooms or in our proceedings now to find somebody guilty of something we're calling a crime, and we walk into court now, and all of a sudden, well, I thought it was. The witness said, I presumed it was. God forbid this is where we're at. But you know, we've also heard today that you can make inference, though. It's okay if you're just inferring. I don't know about the professors here, for those of us in court on both sides of the aisle, I've never heard him go in and hear a judge say, just infer what you think they meant, and that'll be enough. It's not inference. You know, it probably doesn't matter that the president didn't condition a meeting on an investigation. He met with Zelensky with no preconditions. Zelensky didn't even find out about the hold on the aid until it was after a month after the call when he read it in Politico. The aid was released shortly thereafter, and Ukraine didn't have anything to do to get the aid released. Not only was the aid released, but lethal aid was given as well. And if you think that doesn't matter, there were 5 meetings between the time the aid was stopped and the time the aid was released, and in none of those meetings, between ambassadors and others, including the vice president and senators, none of that was ever connected to a promise of anything on the aid. Nothing was ever connected. 5 times. And 2 of those were after President Zelensky learned that aid was being held. Tell me there's not a problem here with the story. That's why fact witnesses aren't here right now. The evidence against the president is really about policy differences. In fact, 3 of the Democratic star witnesses, Hill, Taylor, and Kent, weren't even on the call. They read transcripts like everyone else. On July 26, Zelensky met with Volker and Sondland and made no reference to quid pro quo or hold on aid. They met several more times, no references. But none of those none of these inconvenient facts or so many other inconvenient facts matter to the majority. Moreover, we don't even know what, if additional hearings, we will have to address other facts. This is the part that bothers me greatly. It is something we have seen from January of this year. No concern about a process that works, but simply a getting to an end that we want. You know, I agree with Professor Feldman. He may find that strange, but I do agree with you on something. It's not his job to assess the credibility of witnesses, it's this committee's job. And I agree. But this committee can't do our jobs if none of the witnesses testify before our committee, even ones that we have talked about calling today, and the majority has said we don't want. To do that, we still don't have an answer on what this committee will do once this hearing ends. The committee received Mr. Chairman Schiff's report yesterday, but we still don't have the underlying evidence. The rules even set up by this body are not being followed to this day, but yet nobody talks about it on the majority side. The witnesses produced by Chairman Schiff and the American people talked about their feelings, their guesses, their presumptions, but even though the facts may not matter to the majority, 97% of the other facts do matter to the American people. So my problem is this. As the ranking member of this committee, one of the oldest, most should-be fact-based, legal-based committees we have here, where impeachment should have been all along. I have a group of members who have no idea where we're headed next. I bet you, though, if I ask the majority members outside the chairman, they don't have a clue either. Very much one. Because if they haven't, they should share it. Because this is not a time to play hide the ball. This is not a time to say, we're going to figure it out on the fly. You're talking about overturning 63 million votes of a president duly elected who is doing his job every day. And by the way, was overseas today while we're doing this, working with our NATO allies. So the question I have is, where do we head next? We've heard this ambiguous presentation, but here's my challenge. I've already been voted down and tabled today. Mr. Schiff should testify. Chairman Schiff, not his staff, must appear before this committee to answer questions about the content of his report. That's what Ken Starr did 20 years ago, and history demanded. I told the chairman just a while ago and a couple of weeks ago when we were doing a markup, I said, Mr. Chairman, the history lights are on us. It is time that we talk and share how we're going forward. I'm still waiting for answers. So, Mr. Chairman, as we look ahead, as the Democratic majority promised that this was going to be a fair process when it got to judiciary for the president and others. The president, and you may say he could have come today, what would have this done? Nothing. There's no fact witnesses here, nothing to rebut. In fact, it's been a good time just to see that really nothing came of it at the end of the day. So why should he be here? Let's bring fact witnesses in. Let's bring people in because as you said, Mr. Chairman, you said, your words, we should never on this committee accept our entity giving us a report and not investigate it ourselves. Undoubtedly, we're well on our way to doing that because of a calendar and a clock. So, Mr. Chairman, I know you're about to give a statement, and they've worked on it, and you've worked on it very hard, I'm sure. But I want, before you gavel this hearing, before you start your statement, before you go any further, I would like to know two things. Number one, when do you plan on scheduling our minority hearing day? And number two, why or when are we actually going to have real witnesses here that are fact witnesses in this case? When? Or what you said many years ago has faded just like the leaves in fall. I don't really care anymore that somebody else gives us a report. Undoubtedly, Chairman Schiff is chairman over everything with impeachment, and he doesn't get to testify. He's going to send a staff member. But I don't even know if we're going to have a hearing past that to figure out anything that's been going on. So my question as I started out today is, where is fairness? It was promised. It's not being delivered. The facts talked about were not facts delivered. This president, as facts were given, did nothing wrong, nothing to be impeached, and nothing for why we're here. And in the words of one of our witnesses, Mr. Turley, if you rush through this, you do it on flimsy grounds. The American people will not forget the light of history. So today, before you give your opening statement, or your closing statement, before you get to this time, my question is will you talk to this committee? Your chairman, you hold a very prestigious role. Will you let us know where we're going? Or are we going to adjourn from here after you sum up everything, saying that they all did good, and go out from here, we're still wondering? The lights are on. It's time to answer the question. I yield back.